But I want to introduce to you now this word. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, please remember this one single word. What is it? Name. Okay, your neighbour wasn't listening, but it's okay, we'll remind them in just a moment. Name stands for 4 key elements essential for brain fitness. Nutrition, attitude with stress management, mental challenge and exercise. They are all essential. They work synergistically together. You can't just do one and forget the others. The trouble is, we like doing what we like doing. And we don't like doing what we're not so keen on. So if you're interested in food, you might find it really easy to stick to a more healthy diet, but you might not be so hot on doing the exercise.
Or able to do it.
Or able to do it, yes. So it's all about trying to incorporate something from each of these elements, because that's what it takes to really lift your brain fitness and elevate your mental performance. And there's a couple of extras I'm going to throw in as well, because there's probably 7 steps you need to take to lift your brain fitness. So we're going to go through each one and just briefly think about how can you start to do something a little bit different each day that will start to lift your level of brain fitness. And maybe just 3 top things that you could consider. Because obviously you're not going to become extremely brain fit in 45 minutes. It does take a bit longer than that. But it's going to give you the tools to think about, to go away and think, okay, what am I going to do now? What's going to be the first thing I'm going to be incorporating? Now, I always love talking about food, so I'm going to start with nutrition. Eating for brain health. And it's really important. The food we eat really determines how well we think. It determines our mood. Now, sometimes if you've had a really bad, horrid day, it can be really tempting to reach out for a packet of Tim Tams or a tub of ice cream and console yourself and make yourself feel better. But the trouble is that choice of food actually has a negative impact on your mood and makes you feel more depressed. So it's not the answer. We know what we eat makes us. And we know from the research that what our choice of food can make a big difference to our thinking skills and our memory. Does anybody know which is the best eating plan for your brain? Mediterranean diet, absolutely. And it's called that because that's what the people who live around the Mediterranean area tend to eat. So it's not a fad or anything that hasn't been thought through. It's been used for centuries by people living in that area. And it's been shown by the research that people who adhere most closely to the Mediterranean style of diet maintain their memory and thinking skills for longer. And some of these studies run over 10 or 20 years. So they've really looked into it very carefully. And I always say to people, a diet simply means asking yourself the question, do I eat this? That's all a diet is. And people get very sort of hung up on different foods and combinations and times of eating and all this sort of stuff. And I think, nah, let's go back to the basics here. We understand that we are omnivores. We are capable of eating a wide variety of different foods. If we choose those foods from the Mediterranean style of eating, mostly, we're already on the right track to boosting our brain's health. So what do we include in the Mediterranean diet?
Lots of vegetables.
Lots of vegetables. Olive oil.
Oily fish.
Oily fish. Gelato. Maybe not too much, but yes. Seeds and nuts. Bread, whole grains. Yes.
Water.
Pardon?
Plenty of water.
Plenty of water. That's the aqua pura.
Wine?
Who said that? Which colour wine? Red wine. Red wine contains a substance called resveratrol, which is thought to be anti-aging, and a small quantity is thought to be good for your brain. But if you don't drink red wine, it doesn't matter. But they're looking into using resveratrol as something which is possibly useful for boosting our cognition. But you don't have to rush out and start drinking red wine if you don't like it. And it is only one standard drink, which is 120 mils, not the vase full that you get poured in the local restaurants. So, fish, and we need to be eating fish 2 to 3 times a week. And why fish in the oily, cold water sort of fish? Because they have the highest levels of omega-3s. Every single brain cell, all 85 billion of them, have a membrane. And that membrane incorporates omega-3. And we have to heat omega-3 in order to get it and use it for our brains. Yes?
You can't just eat any fish, though, can you?
No, it's got to be cold water oily fish. Things like salmon, mackerel, sardines, things like that.
So the fish oil tablets not work the same way?
If you don't like fish,
Better than nothing.
it's better than nothing. So a lot of people do take fish oil. Yeah. And 10 a day would be something that you'd use possibly for treating arthritis as an anti-inflammatory. For your brain, you probably don't need that much. Two would be sufficient for brain purposes. So what could be the top 3 things to consider for your brain in terms of nutrition? We know that the Mediterranean diet is the best diet, and that doesn't mean that you can't eat red meat or you can't include dairy. It just means that these other things are better for your brain. And fresh vegetables, really, really good because they're full of antioxidants. We've had that message for 40 years, eat more fruit and veg. We're just a bit slower on the uptake.
I think every restaurant you go to, you have to bang somebody on the head to get.
You do sometimes, don't you? You get a great portion of meat.
Yeah, and no vegetables. I
That's
reckon
right.
they have a rule, but at least they stick to the guidelines, dietary guidelines.
It would be good if they did.
Yes.
They did. So 3 things that you could do to help your brain would simply be to make a start by incorporating more leafy greens into your diet, eating more fish. If you're only eating it once a week, or not at all, maybe start adding a bit more fish to boost it to the 2 to 3 times that's recommended, and certainly drink more water. Turn to your neighbour now and just tell them the one thing that you're going to be doing differently about your diet as of tomorrow. So the second element from name is voluntary, is attitude. Now people often say, well, what does attitude matter to brain fitness? Well, attitude is a choice. It's not something you're born with. It's something that develops over time, according to your experience and who you hang out with, basically. But if you have a more open mindset, you're opening your brain to the possibility of doing other things, of trying something different, of broadening your perspective on life. If you've ever been with, or perhaps married to somebody with a slightly more closed mind, someone who's a bit more negative, then you'll know the impact that negativity can have on a person's thinking. They shut off. They don't want to know. Talk to the hand. So if we are aware that attitude is a choice, if we find ourselves in a bit of a negative funk, we can do something about it by choosing to change that attitude. And there are ways that we can do that. So I want you just to think about how you can change your attitude if you ever find yourself in that slightly negative place. And I want to talk to you also about stress. Because stress impacts us so much. But stress is not all bad. Stress actually has a bit of a bad rap, I think, because people talk about stress a lot, and they're always talking about it as if it's a bad thing. But if we had no stress, we would not have survived. Our ability to react to or respond to stress is what matters. And when we evolved, we used stress as a way of recognizing when we're in danger. And of course, it was an on-off switch. You're just about to cross St George's Terrace, and there's dirty great trucks coming along to run you over. You need your flight or fight reflex to go, whoa, and pull you back so you don't get run over. So your stress response is on, and then it's off, and that's fine. But of course today, things can be a little bit different. And sometimes people find themselves living in a situation where they have more chronic stress, stress which is built up in layers like a chocolate cake. And it's unresolved stress, stress which isn't going away, stress which keeps you lying in bed worrying at night. This type of stress is really damaging to our thinking. Why? It's because our stress response doesn't get switched off. It was designed for an on-off, just like a light switch, but when it's chronic and severe, the switch gets left on, which means that our stress hormones continue to be pumped out all the time. Now, the stress hormones that we're familiar with include adrenaline, the thing that sort of revs us up, and cortisol. And in normal concentrations, they're absolutely fine. We've got a slide of the brain up here at the moment. On this slide here, where it's purple, that's what we call the prefrontal cortex. This is the front part of your brain. It's the front part of your frontal lobes. And it's also known as your executive suite. Did you know you had an executive suite in your brain? Your executive suite is really, really important because it does all the heavy thinking. It does all the planning, the organising, your decision making. It's where you keep your working memory, what we used to call short-term memory. It's also where you keep your brain's brakes. Really important to know when to apply those sometimes, so you don't say or do something that's inappropriate. So it's a really important part of our brain, and it's working alongside another part of the brain, which we know is the limbic system, which is also incorporated with stress response. And in part of the limbic system, we have this little structure here called the amygdala. Now, on this brain scan, it's actually coloured red on that side of that person's head. You've got another one on that side because you have a pair of them. But when you're under severe, or when you're under stress, your amygdala becomes more active. If it's chronic and severe, your amygdala stays very active. And those levels of cortisol are building up at the same time. And you eventually reach the tipping point, where your amygdala says, I'm taking over the joint now. And what it does is it switches off your prefrontal cortex. It just shuts it down. So if you've ever seen somebody who's incredibly stressed and they say, I just can't think of anything at all, my mind's got a complete blank, they're telling you the truth. Because their amygdala is now in charge. They can no longer access their previous memory or experience. They can no longer form new connections to take in new information and learn or take advice from somebody. So if somebody's really, really stressed and you sit them down and have a bit of a chat and you're giving them all this beautiful, useful advice, they can't hear you. They've got to lower their stress levels first before they can even start to take it in. And it's really important to learn how to lower your stress by whatever measure you find helpful, because that lowers your cortisol. And cortisol is particularly damaging to your brain. It's what we call neurotoxic. It's toxic to brain cells and actually starts killing a few of them off, which is not good news. We want to hold on to our brain cells, they're very useful to us. Too much cortisol is neurotoxic, and it's particularly bad in an area of our brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the part of our brain that's crucial for learning and memory. And people who have severe and chronic stress, or very, very severe depression that goes on for years, can lose between 25 and 40% of brain volume in their hippocampus. That's huge.
Can it be restored through therapy?
Through our natural plasticity, if you lower your cortisol levels, if you do your stress management, you can certainly restore a lot of it. It's not known whether you can actually restore all of it. So it's really important to know what to do. So we know that chronic stress is associated with reduced ability to think well. We don't pay attention as well. Our ability to perceive or take in all the big picture around us is reduced. Our working memory, our short-term memory is shot to pieces. You know, if somebody tells you something and it just floats in one side and out the other, you just can't hold on to it. You can't learn the information, you're looking at it, you're trying to stick it in and it just won't stay. And also trying to find our words starts to become diminished as well.
So is that, I mean, one of the things that happens with fibromyalgia is what we all call fibrophobia.
Yes.
Because we're trying to cope with pain all the time.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that
a huge
what's-
stressor.
Yeah.
That is your major stressor. So somehow learning to reduce that stress, cope with the pain better, will then allow your brain to function better. It does, yes. So 3 tips to try for improving your stress management. And there's no one thing that works for everybody. Everybody is different. Practice Practicing gratitude is a really good way of lifting a more positive attitude to life. You can do that by keeping a gratitude journal. We're so bombarded with negative stuff all the time. Just a simple journal where you write down 5 things to be grateful for every day can make a difference. Breathe, and breathe more often. Just practicing those simple relaxation techniques. I've got a handout of some breathing exercises for anybody that's interested, for if you've got 1 minute, 2 minutes or 3 minutes spare and you just want something to bring everything down. And the other thing that I would really encourage you to look into is how to become more mindful. Mindfulness meditation has enjoyed an enormous resurgence over the last few years, and it's because it's been shown or backed up by the neuroscience to make such a difference to managing pain, reducing stress levels, enhancing sleep, improving attention. It has all these benefits. So it's been shown with many, many studies to be of great benefit to people who are living with, in particular, chronic stress and chronic pain. There are many classes available and it's easy to learn. Just a 10 to 15 minute practice a day is all it takes to start to make a difference. And neuroscience research has shown that people who start to undertake being more mindful actually increase their plasticity. They show an increase in the level of the grey matter in their brains after 8 weeks of practice. So it's quite fast.